All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to OneClass. My name is Kevin, and today I'm going to be walking you through some economics questions. A little bit of a background about me. I hold both a bachelor's and a master's degree in economics, and I work day-to-day as an economist. What I'm going to be doing today is just going through, I think there's 13 questions. Just going through some questions answered by our junior tutors. I'm going to verify their answers, and if mine are any different, I will walk you through how to arrive at the same answer that I did. Get started here. Looks like it's working. Question 1 reads as follows. If a good is produced up to the point where marginal social benefit equals marginal cost, A, social welfare is maximized. B, the good is overproduced and the market is inefficient. C, firms are earning zero profits. Or D, all externalities have been eliminated. Our junior tutor has said that the answer is D, all externalities have been eliminated. This is correct. The production of goods will reach allocative efficiency when the marginal social benefits and marginal social costs are equal. Unequal marginal social cost and marginal social benefit tend to create externalities. Therefore, when a good is produced up to the point where marginal social benefit equals marginal cost, all externalities have been eliminated. So there's kind of two scenarios, or I should say 3 scenarios here. One is when our marginal social benefit is greater than our marginal social cost. It's going to mean we have a positive externality. Second scenario, we've got that the marginal social benefit is equal to the marginal cost, which is the scenario that we're looking at in this question here. And when that's the case, we're going to have no externalities. And of course, the last scenario, when it is, that was almost a B. Solid effort for sure. Of course, when marginal social benefit is less than marginal social cost, we're going to have a negative externality. And I'm just going to draw from memory. I'm probably going to look it up after what it looks like. So we would have our demand curve. And we would have our, let me redraw that actually. So I believe this would be the private marginal cost. Oh, I forgot to denote Q, quantity on the x-axis, P for price on the y-axis. And this would account for our externality. externality. And if we were to do what's called internalizing the externality, this means making whoever's producing the externality pay for it. Then we would sum the personal marginal cost line and the externality line to form the social marginal cost line. Here I've written SMC, sometimes it's MSC as I've written above, marginal social cost or social marginal cost, same thing. So without the externality internalized, they would demand this level of Q at this price P. So I'm going to put a star next to, but when we internalize the externality, and so for an example, pollution, one scheme for pollution is causing those that pollute to pay a certain amount for every, I'm trying to think, we'll say liter that they pollute. So if that were the case, to charge for pollution, the result would be moving to the social marginal cost, where we would have a lower amount of the good produced at a higher price. Call these Q prime and P prime. I'm just going to check to make sure I got that right. Yeah, so they've drawn it slightly different, but this is the same concept. They haven't drawn the externality like I have, but here we can see the demand, which is equal to the marginal benefit. I should add that. The private marginal cost, they've written marginal private cost. Again, same thing. When you add the next negative externality to that, so here I'm adding the personal marginal cost plus the externality, we'll see the line rise to the level of the social marginal cost, which includes the private marginal cost and the externality. So in this case, the deadweight loss would be this area here. And they get the same result, where the price rises and the quantity falls. Wait a second, take a picture of that if you'd like. Move on to question 2. This question reads, what is the market definition in economics? Our Janine The Tutor has written that a market is a platform where buyers and sellers can meet to facilitate the transaction of goods and services. There are two types of markets, which are physical market and the virtual market. So for the physical market, we might think of something like going to the farmer's market on the weekend. Vendors come to the farmer's market with their goods. They have like homemade things. Don't really go to the farmer's markets. I don't really know what else they have, but they definitely have some stuff. A virtual market, on the other hand, would be something more like Facebook Marketplace, where again, there are a number of vendors and consumers come to buy things just as they would at the farmer's market. The farmer's market, they're there in person, the goods are in front of them. In the virtual market, you see descriptions or pictures of the goods. And from there, prices are set and transactions are made. Facebook Marketplace. The general idea of both markets is going to be the same. Draw a graph with quantity on the x-axis and price on the y-axis. Supply slopes upwards. So these are like the vendors that show up at the farmer's market. They supply the goods, or people posting on Facebook saying, hey, I want to sell this. And the demand slopes downwards. And the point at which they meet is going to be the market clearing price. So we've got the optimal quantity and the optimal price. And this point where they meet is called the equilibrium, or the market clearing price. All right, we can move on to question 3 here. And question 3 reads, when an economy is operating at a point on its production possibilities frontier, then, and our junior tutor has written that the production of an additional unit of a commodity would require sacrificing the production of the other. That is correct, and their explanation is the production possibility curve, or production possibility frontier, indicates the optimum utilization of the scarce resource that an economy can manage. Thus, when an economy is operating at a point on its production possibility curve, it means that the resources are being utilized to optimum capacity. If we would have to increase the production of one good, then we would have to divert the resources of that particular good, which would cause a reduction in the resource supplied to another good. Reduction in resource supplied would lead to a reduction in production, and hence we would have to sacrifice that much production. Therefore, when an economy is operating at a point on its production possibilities frontier, then the production of an additional unit of commodity would require sacrificing the production of the other. Another possible answer that's really saying the same thing is that when an economy is operating at a point on its production possibilities frontier, then it is running they're running at a Pareto optimal point, or a technically efficient point. So we can draw, I'm going to try that again. So we can draw a production possibilities frontier here. Call this good 1. No, that's boring. Although I don't have anything exciting to write. Call this shoes. So that's one good being produced on the x-axis. We'll write another good being produced on the y-axis. We'll call it shirts. Really was better off going with good 1 and good 2 at this point. But so a production possibility frontier is always going to be bowed outward, like so. And there are 3 sort of potential points on a production possibilities frontier. Inside the arc, on the arc, or outside the arc. So anywhere inside the arc, so point A in particular, but any point inside the arc is going to be attainable. But inefficient. So maybe at point A here, we can produce one pair of shoes and 2 shirts. So that's attainable because it's inside, but it's not efficient because without giving up any shirts, we could maybe produce 4 pairs of shirts here, 4 pairs of shoes, sorry, if we move to point C. Similarly, without giving up any pairs of shoes, if we move to point B here, just realize I called this D. If we move to point B here, we can still have that same 1 pair of shoes, but we can instead have maybe 8 shirts. So anything inside this arc is going to be attainable, but inefficient. Points B and C here are the answer to the question, where we'd say these are Pareto optimal points or technically efficient. Or technically optimal, whatever. So the definition of Pareto optimal is that we cannot make, loosely, is that we cannot make one person better off without making another worse off. Applied to this scenario here, we cannot get, so here we've got 8 shirts and 1 pair of shoes. We cannot get any more shoes without giving up some shirts. So say we want to move to, 2 pairs of shoes. We can do that, but we're going to have to give up 2 shirts. So again, you can't make one person better off without making someone worse off. In this case, you can't produce any more shoes without giving up some shirts, and vice versa. Then there is point D out here. So because point D is outside the curve, we know that it is preferable. You would rather have combination D than combinations B or C, or anywhere else on the Prussian possibilities frontier for that matter. But it's unattainable. We don't have the resources needed to make the combination that we see here at D. With the way the production possibilities frontier is set up, maybe I should say this market is set up. Here at D, that's a combination of 6 shirts and 3 pairs of shoes. And you can get those 3 pairs of shoes. But to do that, you'd have to have only 4 shirts. Yeah, so what this question is alluding to is points B and C here, that you cannot produce an additional unit of a commodity without, if to do so, you must sacrifice the production of another. I don't think there's anything else I'd like to add to that, but. Question 4. Question 4 reads as follows. Economics is best defined as the study of how people, businesses, governments, and societies A, increases the supply of fast food meals, B, make choices to cope with scarcity, C, services, trade, and healthcare, D, comparative advantage. What an incredible collection of potential answers there. Our junior tutor through that has somehow sniffed out that the correct answer is B, make choices to cope with scarcity. They've written that individuals in the duration of their lives have needs for food, shelter, and employment to survive. In addition, they have wants for things that are valuable to them that may add to their well-being or happiness. Not only individuals have needs or wants, but also businesses, communities, and governments around the world. There is no limit to these wants or needs because they all vary for each individual group, and the period of each one's existence cannot be determined. On the other hand, the resources that can satisfy these unlimited human wants are scarce. This means they have a limit and are in short supply. They will not be able to satisfy each human want in the world. So there must be an allocation made to cope with these scarce resources. Now the question is, how will these scarce resources be allocated? Who gets what? How are choices made in the allocation? Economics is the social science that studies how individuals, businesses, governments make choices to cope with scarce resources. Normally I do a little write-up for this question where I say that economics is, best definition of economics is the study of how to allocate society's scarce resources. But I think our junior tutor really nailed this answer. And I think it would honestly just be best, if you're watching, to take a picture of what they said. Because I couldn't have said it better. Well done to our junior tutor. Move on to question 5 here. And the question reads, explain the difference between a change in supply and a change in quantity supplied. So our junior tutor has written that supply is an economic concept that refers to the relationship of the total amount of output available in the market and its price. It is often represented by an upward sloping, It's often represented by an upward sloping curve or line, indicating the positive relationship between quantity supplied and price. Quantity supplied, on the other hand, is the number of output produced at a specific price point. It is represented by a point along the x-axis in a supply curve. In this regard, a change in supply indicates an alteration or a change in the production of output that might be a result of a change in technology or in the number of market participants. On the other hand, change in quantity supplied refers to the change in the amount of output produced at a given price. And that's an excellent answer. I think a good way to illustrate it is with the supply and demand graph. So as always, we will draw Q on the x-axis, quantity, and P on the y-axis for price. Supply slopes upwards and demand slopes downwards. And the point where they meet, we call the equilibrium or the market price. Now our junior tutor has done an excellent job drawing a write-up here about the supply curve. So quantity supplied, when looking at this curve here, the supply is going to be this line. The entire line is the supply, whereas the quantity supplied is going to be where the price is set at, here in this case, at P star. The corresponding quantity, aka if you draw a horizontal line from P star over to the supply curve, the quantity that goes with it will be the quantity supplied. So price were down here at P1, and the quantity supplied would be here at Q1. Similarly, if the price were quite high here at P2, we would draw horizontally over the supply curve, then draw it down, and the corresponding quantity would be Q2. So the only thing that causes a change in quantity supplied is a change in price. And this is going to be a movement along the supply curve. Change in supply, on the other hand, can come from a number of factors, like a whole number of factors. You can list 8 to 10, probably more. Some of them are a change in technology. Change in consumer expectations. Even something like a change in the weather. You know, if the good is crops maybe, and we have really, I don't know, long prolonged winter, that may reduce the supply of some of the crops. And this is represented by a shift in the supply curve. So I've already showed you quantity supplied moving along the supply curve. But if supply were to increase, supply curve would shift to the right. And assuming demand stayed the same, the price would go down from the original equilibrium price, and quantity would go up. Similarly, let me try that again. If the supply were to decrease, I'm going to call this S double prime. Then we would see the price go up from the initial equilibrium quantity, and the quantity go down from the initial equilibrium quantity. Question 6 reads, law of demand definition in economics. Our junior tutor has written that the law of demand states that there's a negative or inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded of a good. With an increase in price, there's a decrease in the quantity demanded, and vice versa. Price, rise or increase, is going to equal a demand, fall or decrease. And on the other hand, price, fall or decrease is going to equal a demand, rise or increase. This is correct. I will show you what that looks like on a graph. So again, I'm going to draw our supply and demand graph. And we're going to have our equilibrium, or our market clearing price. That's where supply meets demand. We draw it down. It's Q star, our optimal quantity. And to the left, that's P star, our optimal price. Now, when we have a very high price, I'll call this PH for P high. We see, if we draw over to the point where the demand curve is, then draw down to the x-axis, we see at a high price, people do not demand a lot of the good because they don't want to pay a lot for it. Similarly, at a low price, PL here, if we again draw over to the demand curve, you can see when the price of something is low, there is going to be a large amount of demand for it. Denote that QL. Also worth noting, if a market is in equilibrium, and the price is increased, then if we continue drawing this over, we'd see that the quantity demanded, noted by QH here, will be very low at this high price, but the quantity supplied, denoted by QL here, will be very high at this high price. So if there's a lot more supply than there is demand, we're going to have what's called a surplus. And not all of the goods in the market will be bought. Similarly, if the price is very low, like at PL here, We cross the supply curve right here. We can call this, I don't know, QS. And we don't reach the demand curve till over here. So in this case, we would have a quantity demanded more than a quantity supplied. There's more demand than supply, so we have a shortage. Moving on to question 7. Question 7 reads, what is the opportunity cost? And our Janine The Tutor has written that the opportunity cost is referred to as the loss of the potential gain for not choosing the other best alternatives while making a choice of one best alternative. Business firms usually make a choice about what to produce, how much to produce, how to produce, etc., and allocate these scarce resources accordingly. The government also makes a choice for allocating scarce resources in different sectors. Individuals also make a choice while purchasing a product from a number of products. I think the first part of that explanation kind of hit the nail on the head. Is the loss of the potential gain for not choosing the other best alternative while making a choice of one best alternative. So for example, you go to the corner store and you're trying to choose what to get, and you're looking between a pack of gum and a pack of mints. So whichever one you do end up choosing, the explicit cost will be what you pay for it. So you went with the gum and it cost $2. Your explicit cost would be $2. But the opportunity cost would have been what you would have paid for the other one. So I'm going to show you the difference between accounting profits and economic profits, because it uses opportunity cost and comes up quite a bit. Here I use the symbol pi to denote profits. So this is economic profits versus accounting profits. So for accounting profits, I'm going to denote those pi a. And accounting profits are going to equal total revenue minus total cost. And in this case, our total revenue is going to equal the price at which the goods are sold times the quantity, the number of goods that we'd sell. And then our total cost is going to be made up of our fixed costs. So if you think about a business, fixed costs are things you have to pay no matter what you sell. So for example, if you're a hardware store, you're open for 12 hours and nobody comes in and buys anything, you still have fixed costs to pay because you had to keep the lights on, pay for hydro, pay your employees, et cetera, et cetera. Variable costs are costs that you pay with each unit sold. So that's the formula for accounting costs. The formula for economic costs is again going to equal to total revenue minus total costs. Total revenue is always calculated the same way. The price of the goods you're selling times the quantity sold. But in the economic sense, total costs are going to include your fixed cost and your variable costs. We can also call these explicit costs. And on top of that, trying very hard not to sneeze here. I think I pulled it off. The economic sense is also going to include our opportunity cost or implicit cost. So if we go back to that hardware store example, you were open all day for 12 hours and it was just you in there running the store and not a single person came in. There is the fixed cost and the variable cost, the explicit costs of what they had to pay in your wages, keeping the lights on, etc. There's also the opportunity cost of what else you could have done with your time that day. Perhaps you could have, I don't know, made something and sold it online and made some money that way. So if you're looking at these two equations, you should note that if opportunity costs are equal to 0, write like this, when opportunity costs are equal to 0, then our accounting profits are going to be equal to our economic profits. So we can move on to question 8. What is Terrace Paribus in economics? Our junior tutor has written Terrace Paribus means holding other things constant. Since economic situations are so complex and many things can happen at the same time, economists simplify them to better explain patterns and make predictions of the future. Terrace Paribus is assumed to simplify and focus on understanding the impact of an economic factor or variable to another without the effect of other variables. Essentially the same meaning, but I was always taught that Terrace Paribus meant holding all else constant. Keyword being all. It really is the same thing. I'm nitpicking, but I found it easier to remember because it means we're only changing single variable. Everything else stays the same. So for example, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me finish writing. So holding all else constant, and for example, whenever we make a change, so say we've got typical supply and demand graph here, so we've got Q on the x-axis, P in the y-axis, and supply sloping up, demand sloping down. Of course, the point they meet is called the equilibrium. So when we say, oh, we're making a change to supply, we're making a change to demand. In this case, maybe I'll say, an especially harsh winter destroys a lot of the crops that farmers would grow. As a result, the supply of corn falls. When we say that, it's a Terrace Paribus assumption because we're assuming that demand stays the same. So for us to say, okay, what is the effect of this harsh winter in the supply of crops? We say, okay, well, look, if we move the supply curve, then the equilibrium quantity falls and the price goes up. So there's not as much corn, and so it costs more if you want corn. But this is ceteris paribus because we left the demand curve straight. So say at the same winter that people really have a craving for corn the summer after for whatever reason, and the demand for corn increases, then we might actually see, let me draw this slightly differently. If we included this effect at the same time, we might actually see the quantity supplied, the equilibrium quantity, increase, and the price also shoot way up. But that would not just show the effect of the decrease in supply from the harsh winter. It would show the effects of the change in supply and the change in demand. So that's why we typically do things ceteris paribus, so we can tease out the exact effect that comes from the supply shortage and not the supply and demand effect. Move on now to question 9. And question 9 reads, which of the following is not characteristic of a perfectly competitive market? Potential answers are A, there are many buyers and sellers. B, firms are price takers. C, there are no barriers to entry. Or D, firms advertise in order to distinguish their products and increase market share. Junior Tutor has written D, that firms advertise in order to distinguish their products and increase market share. We've written that in a perfectly competitive market, there are no barriers to entry and there's perfect access to information between producers and consumers. Thus, firms in this kind of market are price takers, and no single firm can influence the level of prices. Another key characteristic of perfectly competitive markets is that firms sell homogeneous products, meaning their goods are very similar. They can be good substitutes for the other brands in the market. Thus, perfectly competitive firms do not engage in advertisements to differentiate their product because their goods are almost the same as with the other firms. That's a great answer. I'm just going to go over characteristics of a perfectly competitive market. They've already mentioned a couple of them. First, there are many buyers and sellers in a perfect competitive market. So of course, in a monopoly, there's only one seller. There are rare situations where there's only one buyer. So for perfect competition, we need many buyers and sellers. Second, that firms are price takers. This means that they have very little or no influence over the price. If they're coming into this market, they have to sell the good at the price that everybody else is selling that good at. And this is because, as our junior tutor mentioned, products are homogeneous. They are all the same. Theoretically, in practice, it means that they are sufficiently close enough. Example I keep using is mushrooms. Go to the grocery store for mushrooms, and for the same amount, one brand is selling them for $2, one brand is selling them for $4. You're just going to buy the $2 brand because at the end of the day, they are just mushrooms. D is that there is free entry and exit. This is synonymous with no barriers to entry. So firms can come and go into this market as they please. And lastly, there is perfect information. Example I always use with this, if you call an Uber, you can see your Uber driver's rating. If he's got a 5-star, you feel secure and safe in your trip. If he's got a 1-star, you cancel it ASAP. Similarly, the driver gets notification they need to pick you up. If you've got a 5-star rating, they're not worried about you destroying them in your car. If you've got a 1-star rating, they're probably going to leave you out there. So in the long run, perfect competition has an interesting look to it. As I mentioned, firms are price takers. So price in the market is flat. We've got marginal cost sloping upwards, and our average total cost sloping downwards, and the point where all three meet is the point where these firms produce. Call it Q star and P star. So firms advertising or distinguish their products and increase market share is not synonymous with perfect competitive market, but it is synonymous with a monopolistic competition. And a monopolistic competition is a pretty close to perfect competition. With the difference being that products are differentiated. So an example of this is like the restaurant industry, where it's like, oh, I'm in the mood for a burger. You can go to somewhere like McDonald's or Harvey's or A&W and buy burgers at similar price points. You can also go somewhere like the Works and sit down and pay a bit more for a different experience. So because these products are differentiated, because the Big Mac is different from a Works burger is different from a Whopper, these firms need to advertise to try to bring you in to have their burger because all their products are different. Quick second here. Question 10. Producer surplus is the difference between A, the market price, and the minimum price a buyer is willing to pay. B, the maximum price a buyer is willing to pay and the market price. C, the maximum price a seller is willing to accept and the market price. Or D, the market price and the minimum price a seller is willing to accept. So I'm actually going to draw two graphs here. So we've got, again, quantity on the x-axis, price on the y-axis. And our supply slopes upwards, and our demand slopes downwards. So we've got our Q star and our P star. This is our equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. I'm going to draw the same graph down here. We've got that same equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. So in a market like this, where we are at equilibrium with no inefficiencies, there is no dead weight loss. And as a result, this whole area to the left and below the demand curve and above the supply curve to the left of equilibrium is going to be our total surplus. But you can divide this surplus into two different kinds of it. Where this is producer surplus when it is left of the supply curve and below the price, and this is consumer surplus. It's above the price and to the left of the demand curve. So our junior tutor said that the answer is D. Producer surplus is the difference between the market price, so that's this line here, P, and the minimum price a seller is willing to accept. So that is where the supply curve touches the y-axis, so right here. So between here and here and to the left of the supply curve, we've got producer surplus. I'm going to Google that just to make sure. I haven't thought about that concept in a long time. That makes sense to me. I believe it's correct, but I just want to double check. Yep, and that's exactly what it is. That's up number 10. Can move on to 11 here. Number 11, an increase in the money supply will, and our junior tutor has written increased consumer spending and aggregate demand. I'm going to draw the money market graph. I think this is like the quantity of money. I think it goes, I'm definitely going to have to Google this to double check, but I believe this is demand for money, MD. This is our supply of money, MS. Point where they meet, it's going to be the inflation, nominal inflation rate, which I think is denoted like that. I can't remember how to label the y-axis. Oh, just nominal interest rate. Which makes sense because that's what I've drawn there. Nominal interest rate. So what happens when the money supply is increased? That would be correspond with a shift to the right. We'll call that MS prime. As a result, we can see that the new nominal interest rate is going to be lower. So interest rates will fall as the money supply increases with more money in the economy at lower rates. This incentivizes consumers to spend more money, and as a result, increases the aggregate demand, as our junior tutor said. So a good example of this would be particularly the United States. Most developed nations, but particularly the United States, began printing a lot of money and buying back bonds, thus increasing the money supply and decreasing the interest rate. You may have read about or heard your parents talk about the incredibly low interest rates right now. As a result, a lot of people are renewing their mortgages because they can save money doing so because the interest rates are so low. Let's see. All right, second last question here. In economics, if a good is inelastic, 1, consumers have lost interest in purchasing it. 2, producers have lost interest in manufacturing it. 3, its supply or demand is too sensitive to price changes. Or 4, supply or demand is not sensitive to price changes. Janine The Tutor has said that the answer to the above question is 4. That's correct. They've said that in economics, the good is inelastic, its supply or demand is not sensitive to price changes. Oh, Shanice has come back. 2 for 2 fighting it off. Impressive. Further explanation. Demand or supply is inelastic when the percentage change in quantity demanded or supplied of a commodity is less than the percentage change in its price. The elasticity of demand is less than unity. We say that the demand supply of that good is relatively inelastic. So that's correct. So loosely, elasticity of demand is going to be the change quantity demanded divided by the change in price. And there are essentially 3 kinds of elasticity. The absolute value of the elastic demand can be greater than 1. The absolute value of the elasticity of demand can be equal to 1. And the absolute value of the elasticity of demand can be less than 1. If it's greater than 1, we say that it is elastic. If it's equal to 1, we say that it's unit elastic. So if it's elastic, that means the numerator is bigger than the denominator, and there will be a relatively large change in the quantity demanded if there's a price change. If it's equal to 1, then it's unit elastic. There will be a proportional change in quantity demanded if there's a price change. And lastly, if it's less than 1, it will be inelastic. That means there will not be much of a change in quantity demanded if there's a price change. So the example I always go to is an elastic good. You can maybe think of something like video games, where you don't need it to survive, but it's a nice luxury. A lot of people spend their time doing it. And something inelastic might be a necessity, something like food. If everything at the grocery store doubled in price, you probably wouldn't eat much less food because you need food to survive. One last question here, I think, yeah. One factor that indicates a developed economy's standard of living is its GDP per capita or GDP per person. So I went like 3 years in economics thinking like per capita was like some reference to like the size of land or something. Something that didn't make sense for sure, that I just made up. Turns out capita comes from like, is supposed to mean per head, which in modern English transfers to per person. So I didn't know that for like way too long. And GDP is the gold standard of an economy's well-being or a country's well-being. Although it is imperfect, there are other ways to measure this. One of them, if I remember correctly, being the Gini coefficient. And the Gini coefficient or Gini index, if I remember correctly, is I might be breaking this, by the way, but I believe it's a 45-degree line out there, or a 45-degree line upwards, where if it's 45 degrees, you've got perfect equality. So GDP per capita measures well-being by production or output per person, whereas the Gini coefficient measures output or measures well-being by how equally distributed a nation's well-being is. And so let me read this quickly. So you might think of a nation like the States, where the top 400 richest people have like more income than bottom 90%, is it? Bottom 80%, something more than most of the country combined. So that's a very unequal country. The countries that are more equal and would be, so the states would be something like this, whereas somewhere like, I think like Denmark has relatively lower spreads. They might have something more like this as their Gini coefficient. So if you are looking at well-being as, you know, the country as a whole, sometimes the Gini coefficient can be a better indicator of that. There's a lot of debate around the Gini coefficient. Another thing to look into if you're interested in these kind of things is purchasing power parity, or PPP, which is a method of equating currencies all around the world to one sort of currency, so that you can really see how strong purchasing power is in different countries for different people. Those are a couple others on top of GDP per capita, but GDP per capita is certainly the number one way. So I'm going to say that's correct. I think that should wrap it up here. Yeah. So thank you for watching. This has been Kevin from OneClass. If you like the video, you can subscribe. Should be on the screen somewhere. You can subscribe. If you wanted to ask your own questions, there should be a link below the video. You're welcome to like this and share it with your friends. This has been Kevin from OneClass. Thank you for watching.